Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all for joining us today in this live stream event. My name is Albina, and I'm the Program Manager of the Microsoft Reactor San Francisco. I will be sharing session resources with you in the chat, but before we begin, I would like to quickly review two items with you: our Code of Conduct and event guidelines. First, please take a moment to review our Code of Conduct. Microsoft Reactor seeks to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. We do encourage engagement in the chat, but please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional and on topic. And secondly, our event guidelines. This session is being recorded and will be available on demand through the Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel in about 24 to 48 hours. I'll be sharing the link in the chat for our YouTube channel, and if you have not been on a live stream through YouTube before, please know that you must create an account on YouTube in order to access and interact in the chat. You can set that up right now, and if you're unable to use the chat but have questions, feel free to reach out to us through the social media and meetup. Which brings us to today's session. We have Building Your Resume API with GitHub, Codespaces, and Azure Functions. Gwen Peña-Siguenza, she's going to be our speaker for today. Hello, Gwen.
Hi, Albina. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that introduction. Awesome, as always. But yeah, hey, everyone. Welcome to this event, workshop, and such. For those asking, I had a lot of questions about this. Yes, this is going to be recorded. I know some people can't make it live. You'll record it, you'll be able to watch it on the Microsoft Reactor channel once the event is done. But also I wanted to say Ernesto, Microsoft Student Ambassador, previous Microsoft intern, and also returning to an intern following summer, I believe, is going to be in the chat answering questions. So I think I already saw a message from you there. So hi, thank you for helping out. Really appreciate it. Before we start things, I want to show y'all something cool. And then we're going to, I went over one there. Here we go. And we're going to drop a link in the chat that's going to have all the resources that you'll need for this event. I put together source code and instructions on how we're going to be walking through what we're going to be building today. And we're going to drop that link in the chat right now. And it's part of our tech community. So if you go to that link, you'll be able to find everything. It's a post. It has our solution diagram. It has the link to our GitHub repo that we're going to be using. And it also has which is my favorite part, you can comment. And ideally, I would want you all, once you do your own resume APIs, to comment your solutions so I can check them out, give you any feedback, any questions that you have. I'll be paying attention to that post. So yeah, be sure to check that out. And from now on, any events that I do, I'll be putting all the resources on there as well. It's just easier for me to answer everyone's questions, because it used to be like I would do my events and then I would have like nowhere to go and kind of interact with the projects that you all built. So this would be a good space for that. So do be sure to check that out. And during the workshop, I will try my absolute best to get to every single chat message and question, but balance, right? Okay, cool. So let's go in here. Yeah, you're gonna get the link to this if you go to that. That link has all of it in. Let me take a look here. Okay, cool. Alrighty, so we have about an hour to do this. There is a lot to do, so let's get started, okay? So I'm going to actually be implementing this the same way that you all would, the way that I've set it up. So let's just take a look at the diagram for a second here for the architecture. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more here. So right now we're in GitHub, right? For those who aren't familiar, Git and GitHub are ways of implementing version control, which is an important practice when it comes to when you think DevOps. So you think version control, you think infrastructure as code, you think continuous integration, continuous deployment, monitoring, et cetera, et cetera. And GitHub is a service that allows us to implement some of those, a lot of those actually. So we'll be using that for our version control and our continuous integration and continuous delivery, and also actually deployment. And we're also going to be using GitHub Codespaces for our development environment. So you won't need to install anything locally because I've provided a dev container configuration there. We'll take a look at that in a second too. So all of this you'll be able to work on via the browser, which I think is very cool. This top link here, if you scroll down, there's a note right here. It says, We'll be using GitHub Codespaces for our development environment. And at the moment, GitHub Free for personal accounts, which is the account that most people will probably have when it comes to GitHub. It comes with 15 gigabytes of Codespaces storage and 120 core hours per month. And you can read all about pricing there in that link. This README here is filled with links. I try to link as many things as I can. For me, it's important for you not to just be able to follow the steps, but if there's anything additional context or anything that I feel like is important, for example, like here fork, like I say step 1, fork the repository, but you may not know what fork means, so I have a link to documentation that explains what fork is. And I'll try my best to explain as we go too, okay? Then we're going to be developing an API that will return our resume in JSON format. So you can use like a CLI command like curl to get that JSON, or maybe you can build other integrations with the API, and we'll see what that looks like at the end. That API information, or that resume information, is going to be saved in a JSON document that will be on blob storage. We're going to be using an Azure function to recall, to bring up or return that information for us. This is serverless. Serverless is a very what is it like when there's a really popular word? Oh, buzzword. It's a buzzword, but I think over 50% of companies that are using cloud have some sort of serverless service or solution implemented. So it's a very, very important skill set for people who are trying to get into cloud or sort of upskill in cloud computing, cloud engineering, very important. We're going to be using .NET and C#. However, Functions works with Python, Node, PowerShell, and there's custom handlers that you can use any language you like if you implemented the custom handlers. I personally am a .NET developer. I'm a big fan of .NET. I know it gets a lot of hate and a bad reputation for being like legacy, but it is not. There's a lot that you can do with it. And my entire life as a developer, so the last 2-3 years has been with .NET. So it's what I'll utilize here. But the language itself doesn't really matter. This isn't a programming workshop. That isn't the core focus. The core focus is more so you see how these different pieces implemented in cloud and different cloud services can bring together a solution. So more so, let's think about solution architecting. So anyway, your first step is going to be to fork the code. You're going to have an option to fork here, but this is my own repository, so I won't need to do that. Next, we're going to hit code, and you're going to go to Codespaces, and we're going to click this button that says create code space on main. Codespaces is neat. This is probably what I'm going to be using for. I don't see any of the demos that I wouldn't want to use it with. There are some limitations. Like I do a lot of work with Blazor applications, and at the moment support for that isn't the very best. But I think a lot of backend work, a lot of API work can be very well demonstrated and very well developed through something like Codespaces. It's like does anyone have experience with VS Code? If you do, let me know in the chat. I'm taking a look at while this loads here. It's like VS Code in the cloud, but it's cool because it takes the lift off of your computer. Like you could be running this on just like a standard, not like super beefy computer specs, computer with computer specs, and this will work for you. It's pretty neat. The architecture underlying it relies a lot on containers and Docker. Are people familiar with containers and Docker? And you can configure them to have absolutely everything that you need to have. So for example, today, since we're going to be working with VS Code, Azure Functions, Bicep, what else are we going to be working with today? The Azure CLI, I can tell my container to have all of that. So that way, when you all fork it, you don't need to install anything. You don't need to worry about anything. And we'll take a look at the configuration file in a little bit. So things are loading up here. Usually I'll tell you to give it like a couple of minutes because you're going to see some errors here while it configures everything up here. So you can see that bottom right thread giving us an error. But give it a second. You see it's installing dependencies, a couple of things that it's got to do. So we'll take a look at that in a second. So let me take a look at this chat while this is loading. VS Code is great. VS Code is the best. Yes, on VS Code. I heard, what is that new? There is a new one by JetBrains, which is sort of aiming to be something similar to what VS Code is. I can't remember its name, but I'd be curious to see what the future of that is like, what the adoption of that is like. But at the moment, Yeah, VS Code is just such a great program. It's not WebStorm, it's another one. It's like a new one. I'm a VS Code main. Awesome. Also, people, let me know what's your experience with Azure. Have you worked with Azure Functions before? What kind of projects have you implemented with Azure? If you're brand new, I think this is a very beginner-friendly type of project, and I've tried to lay it out in ways that we're working with this project with sort of like best practices and efficiently. Let's say that. I'm also a massive fan of using CLIs. So there's going to be a lot of commands here, but I highly recommend people become comfortable with CLIs as soon as possible in their cloud careers, because let's think about this. If I tell you to go create a virtual machine in Azure and you're clicking around, you go to the portal, you type in virtual machine, you go create, you click through that wizard, it's probably going to take you like 6 to 7 minutes. I haven't really timed myself, depending on your configuration too. But if you compare that to using AZ, VM, create, -- whatever options you need, you can get that done in like 1 minute. And then you just save a script and then you just run that 30 seconds. 6 minutes to 30 seconds, like, come on. All right, this looks like this has loaded. So I can probably zoom in one more here. Now, I'm going to take a look first at where are we? Left side here. On the left side, extensions. I'm probably going to zoom in once more. And then on installed, you see we already have C#, .NET, Azure Account, Azure App Service, Azure Functions, ARM, Azure Resources, Azure Storage, Bicep. That's my theme of choice at the moment, Black Eye theme. Code spell checker. Some of these are custom to just the way I run VS Code. And let me take a look at here. And some of these are required by VS Code as well. Okay, cool. So, you know what? Let's switch to this here. How about that? Is that better? Is that easier for people to see? Just want to do I need to zoom in more, or let me know there? Okay. So anyway, there's a couple of things that are already configured for us once you click on once you get your code space loaded. All right. So if you open up the README, and then there's this little icon here that looks like 2 columns and a magnifying glass. You're going to click on that because this is easier for us to visualize our README documentation. Way better. Okay, awesome. Thank you all for that feedback. And this has all the steps that we need. We're going to start on this first step here that says how to get started. So we've already forked a repository. In my case, I'm just using my own. And then you're going to click on the code button. We already did all of that. And the first thing here tells us is once your code space has loaded in Explorer, you're going to expand the CRC folder and rename it. So that's on the left side here. There is a folder called CRC. We're going to expand that. And then this local.settings.sample.json, we're going to right click, and then we're going to remove the sample from. So you're going to rename it to local.settings.json. And then we can go back here. So the local.settings.json is where our Azure function, which is what the service that we're going to use to build our API, gets its secrets, its connection strings when you're developing locally, or in this case, in our code space. When you deploy that to the cloud and it's in a production environment, it no longer uses this file. You'll have to have other things configured, other app settings configured in another way. But that's going to be taken care of in our infrastructure as code, which we'll take a look at in a second. Okay. So now what we need to do is authenticate our current environment with Azure. So how do we do that? So we're going to go Control J will bring up that terminal, which is at the bottom. It might be easier if should I change this to a white theme? What do you think? Is it easier? Let me see if I color theme. It might be easier to do this on a whiter theme. There we go. I think that might be easier for people to see. Okay. So Control J will bring up, or Command J, depending on what you're using. And then you go to your terminal. And what we're going to do is AZ log in. I actually have this command here. And you're going to do --device. Use -device -code. Okay. And you can do AZ login, but sometimes the browser doesn't pop up. So we're going to use the parameter here, use device code. And then in another window, I'm going to open up the URL that it gives us. Let me grab this URL now. And then you need to copy in that code that it gives you. I'm doing this in a separate browser. Obviously, I don't want to show you the accounts. Okay, and you should get something that says, asks you which account you want to authenticate with, and then there you go. And then you'll get some fish on return. All right, so I can't watch white theme. All right, we're switching black to black then if we can't keep it on here. Give me a second. I just thought it would be a little easier, but we'll just do this one. Here we go. Okay, cool. So now we've authenticated with our current environment with our Azure account. And now what you have to do is set your subscription. You can use AZ account list -- output table to get a list of all the subscriptions that you have available for you to use. Some people have several, some people have just one. So depending on that. And then just use AZ account, set -- name, and then provide the name of your subscription. Mine is Visual Studio Enterprise. I think it's like subscription. Fantastic. And then you can verify if you do AZ account show, just make sure it returns the details of the subscription you want to be working with. Okay, fantastic. Now I have provided some infrastructure as code files. You all know infrastructure as code. Have you all worked with anything like Pulumi? What's another one? Terraform, ARM, or the better version, Bicep, which is what we'll be utilizing today. That's the only infrastructure as code tools I know, but I'm sure there's plenty of more. If I'm missing any ones that you've worked with, let me know in chat. But I've provided us some files under the infra folders on this left side, main.bicep and resources.bicep. So what I'm going to do now is open up that main.bicep. Close this up here. You can see now here it's telling us launching Bicep language service. Okay. So what is infrastructure as code? So the name is actually pretty self-explanatory. It's defining your code in ways that you can give it the benefit that programming languages or coding, I guess scripting would also have this benefit, like version control. You'll have a file that you can edit instead of manually have to clicking through deploying things to a port, right? So for example, we have the main.bicep. If we have like the programming analogy, you have your main method, correct? Your main method is what calls everything else. It's sort of like an orchestrator. And in Bicep, we follow that kind of like that similar style. We have the main.bicep that is going to tell us, all right, so what scope are we targeting? In Azure, you can target resource group, subscription, management group, and tenant. So depending on what level you want to do, depending on which scope you are targeting, you'll be able to provision certain things and not provision certain things. So for us, the correct one would be subscription. Then we have some other parameters that we'll need to know what region we're deploying things to. And also I'm creating a resource group. If you've worked with Azure before, you should be familiar with the concept of a resource group. A resource group it's sort of like, think of it like a folder. Your whole solution will need to exist inside of a resource group. So for example, in this project, our resource group is going to be called, I have it right here actually, RG-serverless resume API. So all the services that I need for this project are going to live inside of that resource group. I think the concept of resource groups is actually unique to Azure, and I really like that it makes it easier to, once you're done with solution, say you're just testing something, so you have like a demo or something like that, you can just delete your resource group, and then all the resources inside of that also get removed. So it's easier for cleaning up and organization. So we're creating a resource group, and then we're telling this main.bicep file, like, hey, there's this module called resources, and you can find it in the same folder in this file called resources.bicep. I need you to go deploy that for me to what scope? To our resource group, which was that resource that we created above here. So all the resources that I am declaring in the resources.bicep file, please put them in this resource group that I declared above here. Okay, and then we have some outputs. So some outputs is once we go and tell Azure to use these files to go create the services in Azure, I need you to return some values because we're going to need these values in a little bit. Okay, so that's our main. Let's take a look at our resource.bicep, and we'll close this off again. And remember, this resources.bicep file contains all the resources that we'll need for our project to run. So again, we're going to need to know the location where our project needs to exist. And we are creating a unique string for our name, application name. And then we have some parameters for the storage account type that we'll be using. And then runtime. Runtime, remember when I mentioned that Azure Functions, you can use different types of different programming languages. But even for something like, for example, .NET, you have in-process, model, and out-of-process. Or the out-of-process is also sometimes called isolated. So you can see the right time here is .NET isolated. If it was a regular .NET or in-process, it would just be .NET. So depending on what type of services, what type of resources you need, your resources.bicep would look different. So this is a custom configuration for this specific project. Again, we use infrastructure as code. We use bicep to describe the infrastructure that we need for our solution, and that will be custom to your solution, okay? Then we have a couple more variables here that we're using to save names for different source resources. So we have a resource called storage account, which is where we're going to be saving our file. Inside of that storage account, we are creating a blob service. Inside of storage accounts have blob, file shares. There's also, I believe, table. So different types of storage that can live inside of a storage account. Blob is, when you think of cloud storage, blob is like the blob type storage is probably like the most popular because it's object oriented. It's great for saving like a bunch of just different types of data. So we're creating a blob service inside of that storage account. And then inside of that blob service, we are creating a container. You can think of containers as like folders that live inside of our blob service, right? And we're going to create one that's called resume. Next, we're also creating a resource hosting plan. And this one is going to be for our Azure Function. Now, Azure Functions has a couple of different plans, but the one to sort of get your best like bang for your buck is the consumption, because you're only paying for like, the time that your function is actually running. So if your function only runs for 30 seconds and it runs maybe 40 times a day, you're only paying for that much amount of time. You're not paying for reserved hours or anything like that. That's on the consumption model. There are pros and cons to that. I've done plenty of other talks on serverless, and we've covered that top. But we are declaring this resource in a way of saying like, okay, I need a hosting plan for my Azure function, and you're going to be the tier name y, the SKU y1 tier dynamic, and a couple of other properties that are specific to that consumption type plan. Okay. Next, we have the actual function app, which is the Azure function itself. So what we're saying here is, okay, we've got the name, we've got the location. Now we are saying here, what kind of function app is this? Well, this is a function app of type Linux, because you can deploy functions that are based off Linux containers, or Linux virtual machines, I should say, and Windows. So depending on like what better fits your solution, you would deploy that here. But for us, we're going to use Linux. Also, depending on the different type of function and the different type of runtime, you might have different properties. So you would have to change that as well. But for here and for us, this is what's going to work. So again, we're telling, okay, all right, so what hosting plan are we using? Well, above here, we already created our hosting plan, so we're just going to reference that. And then some configurations that are specific to a .NET isolated type function. Remember, I was talking about runtimes. We need our Linux FX version, and then we have some app settings. All right. So remember when we were talking about the local.settings.json being the file where we declare our secrets, our connection strings, anything that we need to develop locally or in our code space for our function. Well, when it comes to production, we need to declare these in our app settings, which if you go to the portal, you go to function, you go to configuration, you'll be able to see them there as well. So now we're saying, okay, so in our app setting, we need to create one for Azure Web Job Storage. And here we're already referencing the storage account that we're creating above. So you see how it becomes like it's more straightforward and it's simple to like create resources and then acknowledge that those resources need to be used by other resources instead of us manually having to go and add it in later. Right? Then we're saying which function extensions version we're using, and then a bunch of other settings that are specific to this one here. I'm trying not to go too in-depth with Bicep because this isn't a Bicep tutorial, but just want to give you an idea of what's going on here. And then finally, we're creating an application insights resource, which will be for monitoring. We're not going to use it, but it's good to have here. In case you do deploy your API, you'll be able to see how many times it's been invoked and a couple of other types of monitoring metrics and logs. Okay. And then again, the output is what is it going to return to us when it is deployed. Okay. All right. So we're going to copy this command here, which says AZ. We'll paste it in here. And this one says here, AZ deployment subcreate template file. And while this executes, I will explain the command itself. EastUS2, EastUS2, the best region. Just kidding. It's just the region that I'm the closest to, so that's why I provide it. You should provide the region that's closest to you. And then it's going to ask you, please provide a string value for location, and then just repeat that same region for you. Because you can create the deployment and your infrastructure in different regions, so that's why it's asking you twice. The second time it's asking you is because in our main.bicep, remember at the top we were asking for a location? That's why it's asking us here. Okay. So what is this actual command? I'm going to make this a little bigger just for here, this case. So we can see here, AZ is the prefix for the Azure CLI. So any command that you run within the Azure CLI, you're always going to start with AZ. Then where you working with the group of commands deployment. And depending on what service you're working on, if you're working with virtual machines, you'll use VM. If you're working with storage, you'll use AZ storage. If you're working with function apps, you'll use function app. If you're working with static web apps, you'll probably use SWA. So yeah, every other service in Azure will have its own group of commands. Following that, you'll have the next subcommand. So for example, here we're telling, okay, Azure, I want you to create a deployment at the subscription scope. Here, this can be different types of scopes, tenant, management group, resource group, and then the subscription, right? Then we're telling it, okay, create. And then we have to provide additional parameters. Whenever you see a dash dash, those are parameters or sometimes called flags as well. So these will manipulate how the command works. We're going to take a look at more of these as we go, because this is filled with commands. I'm a big fan of using the CLI instead of going into the portal. Because if we had to go into the portal, we would be clicking around. It takes way too much time. Okay, so this should print out. You see at the bottom, you say provisioning state succeeded. This should be done for us now. So what I'm going to do now is I have a file here at the bottom. I mean, a command here in the second step. And I'm going to clear this out here, and then I'm going to paste this in here. And then we're going to run this as well. That should work for you. And you can see that this has returned for us function app name, function URI, and storage account name. So remember, I told you that in resources.bicep and main.bicep at the very bottom, we have those outputs. So these outputs are values that we want to be able to grab from the deployment. And it's just easier for us instead of having to use the individual commands for each of the services to grab their names. So now I have storage account, my storage account name, and then I have my function app name. What I'm going to do is, because this is a bash shell, I can assign these two variables. So I can just say storage account. Actually, I'm just going to call it storage equals this value here. Okay. And then I'm going to say function app name, function. I'm just going to call it function, actually. Now, if I do echo storage, it's going to provide that value that we assigned it there. And that way I don't have to memorize them anymore. Bash is almost a universal language when it comes to cloud computing, because when you think of cloud computing, it is, it's just a bunch of Linux servers that are networked together. So Linux, when it comes to Linux servers, almost by default, you can almost guarantee that you're going to have shell or bash on there. So that's why I say it's like almost like a universal language there. Okay. All right, cool. So now that we have our values, what we need to do is I provided everyone here a myresume.json inside of this repo. And what this is just the schema that follows the JSON resume schema. And it's filled in with just some generic information, like my name obviously isn't John Doe. I'm not a programmer. That's not my email, but this is just some template information there. You can go and fill this in later, provide all your basics. You're probably not going to want to be that specific with your location. So just remove things as you'd like, change things as you'd like. If there's things that don't sort of match for you, then remove those. But this is just a good start point for you. So now we need to upload this file to our storage account. Remember, we created a storage account, we created a blob service, and we created a container, which is essentially a folder. And we need to put this file into that folder because we need our API to be able to access it. Okay, so what we're going to do is grab that command. Here we go. This third one that says upload my resume JSON to that newly created blob container. We're going to copy this, copy that here. We're going to paste. Nope, that not work. Maybe I need to do Control C in here. Control C and close. What's going on? Hold on. I don't think it's copying correctly. Let me grab this here. Okay, there we go. Let me see. AZ storage blob upload the account name instead of it being the default value that I provided there. You're just going to put $, or you can just type in the storage account. Since I saved it in a variable, I can just put it to storage. That's storage right over here, and then you run that. Awesome. Okay, too. Let me take a look at the comments here. I don't want people to get stuck. I couldn't keep up. I stopped trying, got stuck with AZ login account list. Not sure what I was supposed to list. Yeah, so you need to make sure you have an Azure account, and a GitHub account. That was at the very top of that README. Your GitHub account, Azure account, because you need to deploy this somewhere too. Okay, cool. So let's go down here now, and now we've got the file inside of the correct folder, and we have our API that we are ready to sort of get them connected. But in order to get them connected, we need to get the connection string. There are different types of authentication methods for your storage accounts and different services in Azure, but we're going to use connection strings for this one. So we're going to run this next command here. We're going to clear this as well. And then we're going to paste this command in. And we only need to replace the dummy value that I put in there with, I'm going to say storage here. And we're going to run that here. Oh, hold on. I put the wrong subscription. Actually, I don't think you need subscription here. You might be able to just run this. We need to replace a resource group. My mistake there. RG serverless API. Serverless resume API. Resume API. There we go. And then that value that it returns to you, you're going to copy that in here. The whole value, including the double quotes. So not the connection string, but the value that's returned next to it. Then you're going to go to your local.settings.json. Remember, that's the file that we renamed at the very beginning. And things are getting a little crowded in here. So, and then we're going to paste that in here. You're going to paste it in right next to the Azure Web Job Storage. Make sure the value is within double quotes. And then you can save that here. We're going to clear this. And now that I'm here, I'm going to fix this because we don't need Azure account. We don't need subscription here. Where is that? Yes. So I'll make sure to push these changes to the repo so you all have the proper instructions. Fantastic. So now we should be able to go into the left side here where it says run and debug. And then click on this start debugging. And let's see if it works. All right. So, and can we please drop the link to the post that has all the resources, that has the README, the architecture diagram. R8 is asking for us there. Yeah, but don't worry if you can't complete this now, because the README is going to be available for you. The tech community post is going to be there if you have any questions, if you're doing it after. And this is going to be recorded, so you can just play it back. And then if there are any updates that I provide, I will make sure to push them to the GitHub repo, and then obviously I'll update the post that has all the resources. Okay, cool. So you see this worked for us. Now you see our application running on port 7071. Codespaces is pretty cool because it forwards you these things, right? When you're working locally, if you've worked with functions, you're probably used to working with local hosts in 7071. But now if you click on this open in browser, it's going to open another tab, and you see up here, this link isn't obviously localhost, right? But it does the forwarding for you, which I think is pretty cool. If you click on the terminal on the output here, you see the get resume, which is the name of our function. If you click on here, so control click actually, I might need to do it again, control click, you see we get our JSON data returned. You see it has like a bunch of dummy data, but you can go and fill this in your changes and then just upload the version to your storage account, and it'll return this. And then with this, you can also do, wait, where are we here? We could probably do something like, you open up a new terminal, and then if you do curl, and actually, I don't know if this will work because it's technically not deployed, but Codespaces is doing it's forwarding. Okay, so yeah, actually it does get some information here. Take a look at that. Okay, cool. But this will return us JSON in a second. So let me clear the screen. Let me close this. You can click this red button here to stop your debugger, or you can just hit the trash can here. I'm going to stop this here. And we're going to close this. We're going to close this here too. And we're going to close this side button here. There we go. Or the Explorer. Has anyone used VS Code Pets? It's really cool. I highly recommend it. It's like a nice little, I know it might sound cliche, but it's a nice little companion when you're in VS Code. Check it out. It's really fun. Okay, so anyway, we've got our function working locally, well, within Codespaces, which is local. I don't know. It's in the cloud, but it's not deployed. Yeah, no. It's an interesting hybrid situation we got going on there. Okay, so let's actually take a look at what the code looks like, because I have provided everything for you all. Again, the focus of this workshop is not for you to learn how to program, learn how to develop Azure functions, but it's more so for you to piece together everything and see different types of cloud services and skill sets that you should have. So for example, we've already covered some infrastructure as code. We've already covered some version control. And now we're going to actually take a look at the code itself. I feel like a lot of times when people are trying to understand better cloud or get hands-on with a project or take a step forward from tutorials, it's harder when you're doing something very specific and you don't have the context of like, well, how do these things all together come work? So that's what we're trying to aim for this session here. Let's see here, get resume. Okay, so get resume, which was the name of that function. Remember, we went to the URL. It had the get resume when we clicked on in the terminal. So we're going to close this side one just for now, so we have a little bit more space here, and then I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. So if you're familiar with .NET, it should look very, very similar to you, because this is .NET 6. .NET 7 just came out. I will try to update this to .NET 7 in a couple of weeks. No promises, but I will update it at some point. The actual function itself is here. So we can see here function get resume. If we wanted to change the name, we could change this to like resume API or something like that. And then we have what here is the HTTP trigger. So with functions, you have this concept of triggers and bindings. Functions as a service, it is a type of serverless cloud computing service, which means that your code will execute depending on some type of event. With Azure Functions, those events are called triggers, and there's a bunch of different types of triggers. HTTP, there's timer, there's blob storage, Cosmos DB, I think there's event grid. There's a bunch of different ones. I don't know them all. So some type of event needs to tell your code to run. So in this case, it's HTTP trigger, which means whenever we hit the URL, it's going to call us this function to go and run, which is why when we visited the URL, it returned our function. Excuse me. Oh, I've been talking too much. Okay, where were we? Okay, so then I was saying we have bindings as well. Bindings are a way of getting information into your function and then information out of your function. So if you're trying to get in, it would be an input binding. If you're trying to get information out, it would be an output binding. So in this case, we have blob input. This means when my function is executed, in this case, HTTP trigger, so when I hit the URL, I also need you to bring in some information from a blob container. Remember, we created a storage account, we created a blob service and a container, and we have our file in there. So it makes sense for us to want to use a blob input because we need to get that information and then display it. So that's what our function is. And you can see there's only a couple of lines of code here. And this blob input here is looking for that container resume in that file, myresume.json, in that string. And we're saving all that data into the string myresume. And then we are returning. We're creating a response here, right here. And then to that response, we are telling it it is application.json. And then to that response, we are also writing the content of that string, or of the content of the, which would be the content of the JSON resume. And then we're returning that. Very straightforward, very simple function, but it gets the job done, correct? Okay, cool. So now we get to do another fun part, which is actually deploying this to Azure. And now I'd like to introduce you to a little concept called continuous integration, continuous deployment, or continuous delivery, depending on which one we're doing. So instead of let's look at our README here. Let me just open this up side by side, and then we'll close this here. So let's think about working on a project, and you have it deployed to anywhere really, and you make an update to it. In a production environment, or if you're working in cloud, you're in Cloudrunner or whatever, you don't want to be manually making those deployments. You don't want to be running commands or clicking around or anything like that. So that's where this concept of CI/CD, or continuous integration, continuous deployment, CI/CD for short, comes into play. Its goal is a pipeline. And in that pipeline, you'll establish, okay, if there's any testing that needs to be done, if there needs to be any infrastructure deployment, if there needs to be provisioning of absolutely anything, if someone needs to manually check off on something, whatever it is, like a pipeline, like step 1, step 2, step 3. And the end goal is for that to get deployed. And oftentimes this will be done automatically. So no manual intervention that needed, but we need to configure that. And for this, we're going to be using GitHub Actions. Now, in order to get our function app configured correctly, we need to get something called a publish profile. Okay, so we can use that command here. I copy this, and we're probably going to need to replace some values. Don't need that. All right, cool. So this is AZ function app deployment list, publishing profiles, and the name, we need to replace this function name here. We're going to use, remember we saved the value to a variable called function, and then the resource group, we're going to provide the resource group name, which is rg-serverless resume API, and then we're using --XML because we need XML data for this specific publishing profile. You are going to be returned XML data, of course, but you can just copy everything that comes back to you from that. Don't copy the command, just the values that are here, right? And then you need to go to your repo, and then on your repo, back in GitHub, you're going to go to the tab that says Settings, and then you're going to go to, we're going to go to Secrets, and then on the left side, Actions. You're probably going to, I already have this here, but you're going to just hit Create, New Repository Secret, and you're going to name it Azure_function_app_publish_profile. Since I already have it, I'm just going to update the value and then hit Update Secret. Oh, it looks like I need to authenticate. Let me use security key. Also, if you don't have a security key, like an actual physical key, I highly recommend them. There's just so much better than using like MFA. MFA is a great alternative, very important as well. But having like a physical key, like I have one of these tiny little things, you just plug them in, and it helps keep your things secure. It also helped me fight my social media addiction, because I added MFA to like certain social medias will allow you to add like your account security to this, and then you can only log in if you have it plugged in. And I won't have it on my phone, so it helps. But yeah, anyway, okay, cool. So back to the README. We're going to close this here. And now it tells us to head to the action tab on your repo and manually run the workflow. So on actions, secrets, we can go back to our Syllabus Resume API and then just hit actions. And I have a couple of errors here, of course, because I configured it and then removed everything so I could do it live with you all. So on the left side, you should see deploy.NET isolated Azure function. And then you can click on this last one here and then just hit rerun failed jobs. Actually, rerun all jobs. And then you're going to hit rerun jobs. And they should deploy to you as well. Alrighty, if you don't see that, which you might not, depending on, because if you haven't run a failed one, I'm going to show you how to invoke it automatically as well. So that's going to run. Let's let it run first and make sure there are no errors. This shouldn't take too long, but this is actually a nice looking portal here. You have like the progress bar and all those good things here. Let me see. Okay, you found the link. Awesome. I'm taking a look at the questions in the chat at the moment. Someone's got, looks good. Let me see here. Let's go up here. Sorry, great presentation, but sorry, the speaker video covers part of the screen with no added value for doing this process. Apologize that you don't find value in my face being in here. I think it's very important for the type of advocacy and type of events that I do to be showing my face. It's just the way that I do it. But you have all the instructions that you need to rock through this workshop on that GitHub. That tech community post will also have everything that you need. You can play this back, the recording once it's done, also to hopefully satisfy your needs there. Okay, so that should successfully deploy for us. Now, we'll go back to our preview. Now is the fun part. So what you're going to do now is go to portal.azure.com. And then you're going to go to Function App. I'm doing this in a different screen here because I need to pull up my Function App. Where is it? Function App URL. Okay, Function App URL. Cool. So then I got this Function App URL. We're going to hit paste and go. And then you're going to see a screen here that says your Function 4.9 app is up and running. So then to that Function app, you append get resume at the very end. And this should for you return that same JSON data that you saw. And here we go. This is actually in production. This isn't Codespaces or anything like that. So now if I do something like, let me open this up here. I do curl and then provide that URL. We will also get here some JSON as well. Fantastic. And again, you will need to edit this document to fit your needs and then just upload it, but everything else will work on its own. Okay, so remember I mentioned that we have to manually invoke the action to work. Not manually, via a command. So why is that? We'll go into here. So we can close this, and then on the left side under GitHub, this is where all your workflows. Workflows are the files that are used for GitHub Actions to run. So in this case, I have the build.yaml, and this deploy.NET isolated Azure function app matches that. Go back to Actions, matches here deploy.NET isolated Azure function, right? So because you can have different types of workflows depending on what you need to run. And it's saying, okay, when does this action run? So in this case, it runs when you make a push to branches main. I forgot to configure this to workflow, but I'll make that update and then I'll push it to, so you can manually invoke them as well. So you'll be able to have that button that says run workflow. In order for this to work, clear this here. Let's make this a little smaller here. Wait, I made a change? I feel like I made a change here. That shouldn't have worked. Oh, okay, I don't need to make any changes. Okay, so you're gonna need to commit all these changes that you've done to your repository as well. So you can just do git add everything. And I'm gonna do git, since I made a change to my README, I'm gonna say updates to README. And you can provide any message that you feel is accurate there for you. And then I'm gonna do git push. So because this workflow is supposed to run when on push, so what command push on branches main, I am working on main. And I go back to actions, you see it is running again, updates to README. So you can go ahead and do that, and that should run that for you. And then the function app itself isn't going to change because I just made updates to the markdown, which would be this is markdown, this folder here. And I think I just updated a command in the parameters here. So that should work for you. Let me take a look 1 second at something here. So this is what your functions should look like. So if you go to dashboard function app and select the name of the function, you can just identify it by looking at the correct resource group. Remember, it's rg-serverless resume API. And then here's where you can get all the details, like your URL for your app, and then that's what you'll need to visit your function app. Fantastic, everybody. Let me go back here 1 second. You all back. Where's my StreamYard here? Alrighty, and that is actually it. You'll have a resume API deployed to Azure, and you also have infrastructure as code, which is one of the most important DevOps practices, and then CI/CD, which is also an important DevOps practice. So let me go back to, where are we going here? This one? Yes, this one here. Okay. I can stop sharing my screen. We're going to remove this here, and then I'm going to see any questions that I have missed this time here. If you're having issues, yeah, so just make sure, I think the issue there was not having an Azure account, so make sure you do have that. You need an Azure account, Azure subscription, because you're deploying things to Azure. And then GitHub account, Azure account's all you need. But again, just no worries if you weren't able to complete it this time around. You'll have the recording, you'll have all the resources at the Tech Communities link, which we'll have somewhere here. Let me see what else did we miss here. Is there a quick way to do this? I'm not sure what the question, like what the context of that is, but if you want to ask it again, I'll be here to answer it. We have about 5 minutes left here. I'm getting an error. Can you just describe the error that you're getting here? Let me see. Let's see here. Error. Let me take a look. Video. Oh. Looking at dev containers for secure development. Yep. I think it's now because all personal accounts have access. It's like a certain amount of storage and a certain amount of core hours per month. I think it's going to be a pretty decent option for people to actually fully develop, which I think is pretty cool. Again, not everything is fully supported. Like I was mentioning earlier, working with Blazor WebAssembly, I can figure out debugging, but I know all that stuff is in the works, so that's very important. Let me scroll down here. Will this current YouTube address be the same for the recording? Yes, it will be. So to share, you can copy the URL. Yes, you can copy that URL that's in production, and that is your API. To take it a step further, you can look into having like a custom URL and pointing it to your function app. You can do that in the settings as well, but you'll need to like buy your custom domain. Like, I don't know, for me it would be like gwynethsresume.com or Gwyneth's Resume API or something like that, right? But yeah, the recording will be available in a couple. I think as soon as this is done, it takes maybe a couple of hours, and it'll be on there. But yeah, I think this is a pretty neat thing. Apart from, I would encourage you to make the README your very own. So if you ran into any challenges or you had to figure out, I don't know, any kind of thing that was difficult that you worked through, or any troubleshooting or any things that you want to implement next or further, I would highly recommend you document that in your README as well, because those are great things to have in projects. It's not all about just what you accomplish; it's also what what troubles you ran into. because that is also a very important skill set when it comes to, you know, having something like to speak to in an interview, or to speak to for, like, I don't know, like a promotion, or just being able to speak about your technical skill set in just like normal language. Very important. Let's see here. Thanks, Ryan. It's good to watch live and have a recording to code a long. Yeah, yep. I would highly recommend you take that approach. Again, if you have any questions, just ask me there's a comment section in that post that I shared. I will make sure to get back to you either later today or tomorrow. I can actually probably share them. Here we go. Perfect. But yeah, Reactor Tech Community. Be sure to stay up to date with our Reactor too, because we have content, or we have events going on all the time. A lot of the commands that I ran are, I'm doing 2 sessions on the Azure CLI, which one is next week, and then the one is like 2 weeks after that, because Thanksgiving's happening, so we need to take a couple of days off. But yeah, I'm a big fan of Bash. I'm a big fan of CLIs, and I feel like it's a skill set. A lot of people tend to get scared or avoid because, you know, it's just like a black screen and white text. But it's very, very powerful. So I'm going to be doing an introduction to the Azure CLI and then an introduction to Bash with the Azure CLI, the session after that. So be sure to check that out. I'll have posts to all of those also at the Reactor Tech community. But yeah, I think I've got all the Happy Turkey Day. Yes. I don't actually eat turkey. I'm not a big fan of turkey, but I'm a big fan of coming together with my family. An excuse to get together with my family is always important, and always, you know, grateful for those opportunities, right? So yeah, if anyone celebrates, I hope you have a fantastic Thanksgiving. But I think that is it. I know we dropped a survey. Oh, here we go. You read my mind. We have a survey link here. Any feedback on this event, anything you want to see, anything you don't want to see, any kind of words, be sure to fill that survey out. I know, Ernesto, you were in the chat helping out. Thank you so much. Albina, thank you so much. And I think we can end this live, everyone. I will see you at the tech community posts, because I want everyone to share their URLs there so I can give you feedback. All right. See you later. Thanks.